In the grand stories of World War II, we hear the same names: Hitler, Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin. We remember the great battles: Normandy, Stalingrad, Pearl Harbor. But behind the thunder of tanks and the roar of aircraft, there were millions of men and women whose stories were left untold. They came from faraway lands, from the deserts of Africa, the forests of Burma, and the villages of India. They were the soldiers who wore no medals of fame, who returned home to silence, and whose bravery faded into the background of history. These are the forgotten soldiers of World War II. The war that began in 1939 was not just a European conflict, it was a world war in every sense. Over 100 countries were drawn into the flames, and armies from every corner of the earth marched under flags not their own. More than 2.5 million soldiers from British India alone served across Africa, Europe, and Asia. They fought under the British crown, yet many never saw freedom in their own homeland. African soldiers fought bravely in jungles and deserts, while Chinese and Filipino fighters resisted invasions with whatever weapons they could find. For every name written in history books, there were thousands erased by time. Their courage went unrecorded, their sacrifices unnoticed. In muddy trenches and burning villages, they fought for causes they barely understood, freedom for others while they remained under chains. Many never received letters from home, never saw their families again. Some were buried in unnamed graves, far from the land they called home. As generals drew lines on maps, these men marched into battles where death was certain, yet they fought. They fought not for glory, but for survival, for brotherhood, and for the faint hope that someday, someone would remember them. The British Empire, stretched across continents, called upon its colonies when war erupted. From the dusty plains of Punjab to the bustling ports of Bombay, young men answered a call that was not their own. They were promised honor, adventure, and the chance to serve a noble cause. Yet many did not realize they were marching into a war that would consume the world. In 1939, the British Indian Army became the largest volunteer force in history, over 2.5 million men. They came from different religions, languages, and regions, united under a single command. Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, and Gurkhas stood side by side, their hearts beating to the same rhythm of duty. Their journey took them far from home, to the deserts of North Africa, where the sun burned mercilessly, to the jungles of Burma, where disease claimed more lives than bullets, and to the mountains of Italy, where they climbed through freezing winds to fight an enemy they had never met. These soldiers fought with bravery and discipline, earning the respect of both allies and enemies. Yet, when victory parades marched through London, their faces were missing. The world cheered the heroes of the West, while the voices of the East were drowned in silence. Many of these men could not even read the orders they were given. They followed commands shouted in a foreign tongue. Yet, in the chaos of war, courage needed no translation. In the Battle of Monte Cassino, Indian troops fought side by side with the British and Polish forces, climbing impossible slopes under enemy fire. Thousands fell. The world remembers the victory, but not the brown faces who made it possible. For every medal pinned on a general's chest, there were hundreds of nameless soldiers buried in the mud. After the war, when they returned home, there were no parades waiting for them. Instead, they found famine, poverty, and political unrest. Some returned to countries still under colonial rule. Their reward for serving the empire was silence. Across the vast African continent, thousands of men were pulled from their villages, often with little choice, to fight in a war they barely understood. They were called Askaris, King's African Rifles, and Tirailleurs, N'Gale, proud units that fought under foreign flags for an empire that rarely said their names. From Nigeria to Kenya, from Senegal to South Africa, they crossed oceans and deserts to fight for freedom, freedom they themselves did not possess. They fought in Ethiopia, in Burma, in Italy, against enemies they never met before, for leaders they never saw. In muddy boots and torn uniforms, they carried the heavy burden of duty. In East Africa, the King's African Rifles faced the Axis forces in the dense jungles of Burma, fighting through heat, insects, and disease. Many of them died not from bullets, but from hunger, malaria, and exhaustion. Their graves, unmarked. Their names, forgotten. Yet, without them, victory would have been impossible. The tirailleurs en galets, the French colonial troops, marched across Europe, dark-skinned men in foreign lands, treated as tools of war. Even after fighting bravely in battles like Monte Cassino and liberation campaigns in France, many were imprisoned or even executed when they demanded fair treatment. The Caribbean soldiers too, from Jamaica, Trinidad, and Barbados, answered the call. They served in the Royal Air Force, manned ships across the Atlantic, and worked tirelessly in factories and fields that fed the Allied war machine. But when peace returned, racism and discrimination greeted them instead of gratitude. In the Pacific, men from Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands fought side by side with Australian and American troops against the Japanese advance. They were brave, resourceful, and loyal, yet their sacrifices were written in small footnotes, hidden deep in history books. These were men who stood in the shadows of empire, brave, uncelebrated, and unseen. They fought not just an external enemy, but the invisible chains of prejudice and colonialism. Their courage was not measured in medals, but in endurance, the ability to march another mile, to hold the line another day, to fight on, even when hope was gone. History did not remember their faces, but the earth remembers their footsteps, the jungles they bled in, the deserts they crossed, the seas they sailed. All hold the memory of those who fought without recognition. They may have been called colonial troops, but they were warriors, men who gave everything for a freedom they never lived to see. And now, through time's silence, their voices rise again, whispering through the wind. In the vast lands of Asia, another front of the war was burning, one often overshadowed by Europe's headlines. From the mountains of China to the jungles of the Philippines, millions of men and women fought in silence, their sacrifices lost beneath the roar of global empires. When Japan invaded China in 1937, long before the world called it World War II, the Chinese army and countless civilians rose to resist. Villages were destroyed, families torn apart, yet they continued to fight for 8 relentless years. Chinese soldiers fought with minimal weapons, outdated rifles, and endless courage. They battled through famine and disease, losing millions of lives in one of the bloodiest wars in human history. Their fight drained the Japanese army and changed the course of the global war. But history rarely gave them credit. In the Philippines, when Japanese forces invaded, ordinary farmers, students, and fishermen became guerrilla fighters. They waged a hidden war from the shadows, ambushing convoys, rescuing prisoners, and feeding intelligence to the Allies. Their weapons were few, but their spirit was unbreakable. The jungles of Luzon, Mindanao, and Leyte became their battlegrounds and their graves. Yet even among the Allied nations, prejudice ran deep. In the United States, more than 100,000 Japanese Americans were forced into prison camps, their loyalty questioned simply because of their ancestry. Still, thousands of them volunteered to fight for the very nation that imprisoned them. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed almost entirely of Japanese American soldiers, went on to become one of the most decorated units in U.S. military history. They fought in Italy, in France, in the forests of Europe, earning medals for bravery while their families lived behind barbed wire. It was a paradox of loyalty and pain, fighting for freedom while being denied it. Across Asia, resistance fighters from Burma, Indonesia, and Vietnam also joined the struggle. Some fought against occupation, others against colonization. In every corner of the East, there were faces history forgot. Nurses who carried the wounded under fire, villagers who hid refugees, and children who grew up amid gunfire and fear. Their war was not fought for glory, but for survival, for their families, for their land, and for the dream of a day when peace would no longer be a stranger. As we look back today, we must remember, the courage of these forgotten soldiers was not written in medals or monuments. It was written in their endurance, in every heartbeat that refused to surrender. The East, too, had its heroes. They may not have spoken in English, but their courage spoke louder than words. When we think of soldiers, we often picture men in uniforms, guns in hand, marching through battlefields. But in the shadows of war, there were others. Women who fought without rifles, yet with unmatched courage. They were nurses, spies, resistance fighters, and messengers. They carried bandages instead of bullets, secrets instead of swords. And though they rarely wore medals, their bravery was no less than any soldier on the front line. In Europe, women joined underground resistance movements. In France, the women of the resistance smuggled weapons, transmitted coded messages, and sheltered Allied pilots escaping Nazi patrols. If caught, they faced torture or death. Yet they continued, night after night, invisible warriors fighting in silence. In the Soviet Union, women didn't just work behind the lines, they fought. Thousands joined as snipers, pilots, and machine gunners. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the Lady Death, was one of the most feared snipers of the entire war. With over 300 confirmed kills, the Night Witches, an all-female Soviet bomber regiment, flew rickety planes made of canvas and wood. They would cut their engines and glide silently over German camps before dropping bombs, disappearing into the night like ghosts. In Asia, women served in the shadows too. Indian women worked as nurses for the British Indian Army, while members of the Rani of Jhansi, regiment led by Subhas Chandra Bose, took up arms for India's freedom under the banner of the Indian National Army. In the Philippines, women like Josefa Lanes Escoda led resistance efforts, smuggling food and medicine to prisoners of war until she was captured and executed by Japanese forces. And behind every front line, millions of women kept the world running. They built weapons in factories, drove ambulances through bombed streets, and tended to wounded soldiers who cried for mothers they would never see again. They endured hunger, fear, and loss, yet they never stopped. When the war finally ended, most of these women returned to silence. Their uniforms were packed away, their medals forgotten, and their stories left untold. The world celebrated victory, but forgot the women who helped make it possible. They didn't fight for fame or power. They fought because they had to, because humanity itself was under threat. Their battlefield was not just the front line, it was every hospital, every home, every heart that refused to give up hope. These are the women who fought without weapons, who carried the weight of war in their hands and hearts. And though history may have forgotten their names, the world they saved still whispers their legacy in every breath of freedom we take. War does not end with surrender. For many, it only begins behind fences of iron and wire. Across continents, millions of soldiers were captured and thrown into prisoner of war camps, where hunger, disease, and hopelessness became their daily enemies. Some were Allied soldiers taken by the Axis, others were Axis troops captured by the Allies, and many, from colonial armies, were trapped in between, forgotten by both sides. The Geneva Convention promised fair treatment for POWs, but war has little room for promises. In Europe, prisoners faced freezing winters in wooden barracks. They dug tunnels in secret, hoping to escape, one step closer to freedom or death. In places like Stalag Luft III, brave men risked everything to dig their way out, inspiring tales that would one day become legend. The Great Escape. But beyond the European front, darker stories unfolded. In the jungles of Asia, under the blazing sun, Allied and colonial soldiers were forced by the Japanese army to build the Burma-Thailand Railway, now remembered as the Death Railway. They worked barefoot on sharp stones, half-starved and fevered. Over 100,000 men died building those 415 kilometers of track. Men from Britain, Australia, India, and Southeast Asia. Their graves lay hidden beneath the soil, their screams buried beneath the sound of hammer and steel. Even after liberation, many POWs returned home to a silence they did not expect. Some were called heroes, but most were met with indifference. They carried invisible wounds, nightmares that haunted their sleep, memories that refused to fade. One soldier described it simply: "We survived the war, but the war never left us." Some prisoners formed bonds stronger than family. In those camps, nationality disappeared. Hunger and pain united them all. British, Indian, Dutch, and Australian soldiers shared the same bowl of rice, the same stories, the same hope. In that suffering, they rediscovered what it meant to be human. And yet, history often skips their pages. Textbooks spoke of battles and leaders, not the men who lay awake each night counting stars through barbed wire. Their courage was not in firing bullets, but in surviving when death seemed kinder. They were not victors or villains. They were witnesses of cruelty, of endurance, and of the fragile line between hope and despair. Today, the rusted remains of those camps still stand silent monuments to the forgotten voices behind the wire. And if you listen closely, the wind still carries their whisper. We were here, we endured, remember us. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the world celebrated. Cities erupted with joy, flags waved in triumph, and leaders declared peace. The victors stood proud, medals gleamed, cameras flashed, and history was written by those who had won. But for millions of soldiers, the war never truly ended. They returned home to find that their battles had been forgotten. In Europe, streets filled with celebration, yet men who had spent years in prison camps found no one waiting. At the train stations, their faces were lost in the crowd, their sacrifices overshadowed by the grand speeches of generals and politicians. For soldiers from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, the pain was even deeper. They had fought for empires that no longer needed them. The same governments that had once called them heroes now turned their backs. Promised pensions were denied. Medals were hidden away. Recognition vanished into silence. Many Indian soldiers who had fought bravely under the British crown came home to a nation in turmoil, the movement for independence raging, the idea of empire collapsing. Their loyalty was questioned, their service forgotten. African veterans returned to find colonial rule unchanged. Some were beaten when they demanded their pay. In Senegal, a peaceful protest by demobilized tirailleurs in 1944 was met with gunfire, their blood staining the soil they had fought to defend. In the Pacific, the men who had resisted Japanese occupation returned to devastated islands. Their homes were gone, their families scattered, their names erased from memory. Across the world, a quiet bitterness grew, a feeling that the war had taken everything, yet given nothing in return. Some veterans drank to forget, others never spoke again. The nightmares lingered, the sound of bombs, the cries of dying friends, the faces of those left behind. They carried these ghosts with them, year after year, long after the parades ended and the music faded, and still, no one asked them about their stories. Decades passed, nations rebuilt, technology advanced, generations moved on, but history left a blank space where the names of these men and women should have been. Yet, even in their silence, they left something powerful behind, a legacy not of glory, but of endurance. A lesson that courage is not about being remembered, but about standing firm in when no one sees you. The forgotten soldiers of World War II did not seek fame. They sought survival. They sought dignity. And though the world may have turned away, time has a way of uncovering the truth. Today, their stories are finally being told. Their courage is being rediscovered. Their voices are no longer whispers in the dark. They are the echoes of a generation that refused to disappear. They may have been forgotten once, but not forever. Time moves on, empires fall, borders change, generations pass, but courage, true courage, never dies. The soldiers who once stood in the smoke of war are gone now. Their uniforms have turned to dust, their rifles rusted, their names carved on stones few ever visit, but their spirit, their sacrifice still lives. In every freedom we enjoy, in every dawn that rises without fear, their invisible hands are there. They built the world we inherited, brick by brick, hope by hope, life by life. They were men and women who came from every corner of the earth, Africa, Asia, Europe, the Americas, the Pacific. They spoke different languages, prayed to different gods, and fought under different flags. Yet in the face of chaos, they were united by one thing: humanity. They fought not for conquest or wealth, but for survival, for the dream of peace, for a tomorrow they might never see. The world called them forgotten soldiers, But how can those who carried the weight of the world ever truly be forgotten? In recent years, historians, filmmakers, and families have begun to uncover their stories. Memorials are being built in their honor in India, in Kenya, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific Islands. Slowly, their voices are being heard again. A great-grandson finds his ancestor's photo in an old trunk. A dusty medal is polished and placed in a museum. A classroom learns the name of a soldier who never came home. This is how memory begins again, not with monuments of stone, but with the beating of human hearts. Because remembrance is not just about history, it's about gratitude. Gratitude for those who gave everything and asked for nothing. Gratitude for the nameless nurse who comforted the dying. Gratitude for the African soldier who stood firm in a foreign desert. Gratitude for the Indian sepoy who never saw the freedom he fought for. Gratitude for the women who fought without recognition. Gratitude for all who carried the burden of war so that the world could one day know peace. And as we stand in the quiet of remembrance, we realize it is not the medals, nor the monuments, that make a soldier immortal. It is the memory. As long as we remember them, as long as their stories are told, they live on in us, through us, and beyond us. The world may have once forgotten them, but today, we remember. And in that remembrance, they rise again, not as shadows of history, but as the eternal guardians of humanity. Decades have passed since the thunder of war faded from the skies. The guns are silent now. The soldiers who fought have become faces in black and white, photographs, their eyes frozen in time, their voices carried away by the wind. But history, like memory, never truly dies. It waits quietly for someone to remember. In forgotten attics and dusty boxes, families are rediscovering the fragments of the past. A uniform patch, a rusted medal, a torn letter written in the chaos of war. Each piece tells a story, each name a heartbeat that once echoed through the noise of battle. In India, grandchildren sit beside their elders, listening to tales once too painful to share. In Africa, community leaders rebuild memorials for regiments erased from the records. In France, schoolchildren lay flowers on graves, marked "Soldat in Kanu, unknown soldier." And in those moments, remembrance becomes more than history, it becomes healing. The world begins to understand that these forgotten soldiers did not belong to one nation. They belonged to all humanity. Their courage speaks across time, reminding us that freedom was never the gift of the powerful, but the price paid by the humble. In museums, new exhibits now tell their stories. Old photographs are being restored, oral histories recorded. The world is beginning to remember what it once chose to forget. For many families, this remembrance is personal. A young woman in Kenya discovers that her great-grandfather marched through Burma under the British flag. A boy in the Philippines finds out that his great-grandmother was a guerrilla nurse who saved lives with her bare hands. A teacher in London includes the Indian and Caribbean divisions in her lesson about D-Day. The forgotten are being remembered not as shadows, but as people. And perhaps that is the greatest tribute of all, to see them not as statistics, but as souls. They were not heroes in search of glory. They were human beings, scared, brave, flawed, and strong. They fought because the world asked them to. And now, the world must answer back by never forgetting. The echoes of their footsteps still travel through time, in the quiet of remembrance ceremonies, in the sound of national anthems, in the silence that follows the last post. Because remembrance is not just about looking back, it's about carrying their courage forward. Every act of kindness, every stand for justice, every choice to protect rather than destroy is how we honor them. The forgotten soldiers of World War II may have been buried in silence, but today, through memory and gratitude, they live again. The war ended long ago. The bombs have fallen silent, and the maps of empires have changed. But the cost, the human cost, remains written in the hearts of those who remember. The forgotten soldiers, they did not fight for fame or glory. They fought for survival, for comradeship, for the hope of seeing another sunrise. Some never returned home. Their names never made it to the books. Their medals were lost in the dust of time. Yet their spirit lives on, the freedom we take for granted, in the peace that blankets our nights, When we walk freely through our cities, when we speak without fear, when we dream without chains, we are walking in the footsteps of those silent heroes. They gave up their tomorrows so we could have ours. Today, their graves lie scattered across jungles, deserts, mountains, and oceans. Some marked, some unmarked, but every patch of earth that holds their bones is sacred ground. Each rusted helmet, each faded photograph, each name carved on a wall is a reminder freedom was never free. The forgotten soldiers of WWII were more than just warriors. They were farmers, teachers, sons, and daughters who answered the call of duty when the world was breaking apart. And though their voices were lost in history's noise, their courage still whispers in the wind. It whispers through the flags that rise each morning. It echoes through the sound of the bugle at dawn. It lives in every child who grows up in a world without tyranny. We owe them remembrance, not once a year, but every day we live in freedom. Because to forget them is to forget ourselves. The world is finally learning to listen. Documentaries are being made. Museums are being built. Stories are being told in every language, every land. The faces once lost in the crowd now shine on screens. Their names spoken with honor once again. This is their victory. Not the parades, not the medals, but the act of being remembered. As the camera pans across endless fields of graves, the narrator's voice grows quiet. Here lie the brave. Here lie the forgotten. And here lies the proof that humanity can rise again. The image fades to black. Only the sound of the wind remains. The forgotten soldiers are no longer forgotten. They live in memory, in gratitude, and in every heartbeat of peace. Because remembrance is eternal. This is their story. This is their legacy. The forgotten soldiers of WWII. The generation that fought the Second World War has almost vanished. Their voices have grown faint, their faces fading like old film reels. Yet, what they stood for, courage, unity, sacrifice, remains carved into the soul of humanity. They were not just soldiers in uniforms. They were reminders of what happens when darkness tries to consume the world, and how ordinary people rise to stop it. In every nation, there are stories still being discovered. A forgotten photograph in a trunk, a diary written in pencil, a medal found in a field where men once fell. Each item a fragment of a larger story, a mosaic of pain, love, and endurance. These fragments are being pieced together by a new generation. Students, historians, and filmmakers are giving voice to those who could no longer speak. The forgotten are becoming known, their stories woven back into the fabric of world history. In memorials around the world, candles burn for those who never came home. The flicker of each flame is a heartbeat, a silent promise that they will not be lost again. In classrooms, teachers speak of the soldiers who fought in places most maps no longer show. In cities, murals rise, faces of young men and women painted on old brick walls, staring into the present, as if to remind us, we were here, we mattered. The message is timeless. Peace is fragile. Freedom is precious. History, if forgotten, repeats itself. That is why remembrance matters. The world owes its peace to millions who never asked for recognition. They simply did what they believed was right. Their legacy is not in monuments, but in the way we choose to live. When we stand against injustice, when we help the weak, when we protect rather than destroy, we continue their fight. Not with weapons, but with humanity. The forgotten soldiers of WWII may have vanished from the battlefields, but their spirit marches on in every act of kindness, in every stand for truth. Someday, there will be no one left who remembers the war firsthand. But that is why stories like this must be told again and again, so that the silence of time never erases the sound of their courage. The last pages of their story belong to us. And as the world looks to the future, uncertain, divided, and searching for hope, we must remember what they taught us. That unity is stronger than hate, that peace is worth every sacrifice, and that even when history forgets, humanity must not. The legacy of the forgotten soldiers will live, not in stone, not in books, but in hearts that choose to remember. World War II was not just a conflict of nations. It was a test of humanity, and within that chaos, millions of forgotten soldiers proved that even in the darkest of nights, courage can still burn bright. Today, we live in a different world, connected by technology, divided by ideologies, yet still searching for peace. The faces may have changed, but the choices remain the same. Will we remember? Will we learn? Will we protect what they died for? History has shown us what happens when hatred is left unchecked. When power blinds compassion, and silence becomes complicity. The forgotten soldiers of WWII fought not for conquest, but for the right to live in a world free from fear. They stood shoulder to shoulder, black and white, rich and poor, from colonies and kingdoms alike, proving that courage knows no border, no language, no race. That unity, above all, is humanity's greatest weapon. Today, when nations tremble under new threats, when voices are silenced by tyranny once again, we must remember their sacrifice. Because remembrance is not just about looking back, it's about standing up now. In every act of kindness, in every moment, we choose peace over anger. In every time we speak for the voiceless, we continue the battle they began. The world they dreamed of was not perfect, but it was one where compassion defeated cruelty, where understanding overcame fear, where no one was forgotten. That dream belongs to us now. The children of peace are the legacy of those who died in war. And every time we teach love instead of hate, every time we build instead of destroy, we keep their memory alive. The monuments will fade, the records will crumble, but the spirit of the forgotten soldiers, that will endure as long as humanity remembers its heart. So when the world grows dark again, and the storm clouds of conflict begin to rise, we must look back and hear their voices. Never again. Not to the bombs, not to the hatred, not to the blindness that tore the world apart. The forgotten soldiers of World War II were not myths or numbers. They were real. They laughed, they feared, they loved, and they dreamed. They walked through fire so that the next generation could walk in peace. And though time has erased their footsteps, the earth still remembers where they stood. Beneath the soil of distant lands lie those who never returned home. Indians in Italy, Africans in Burma, Russians in Stalingrad, Americans in the Pacific, Japanese in the ruins of Hiroshima. Every nation carries its own wounds, and every wound tells the same story, that peace is born from pain. Today, we live in a world built on their sacrifice. We drive on roads that were once battlefields. We live in cities that rose from ashes. And we breathe the air of freedom they bought with their blood. Yet with each passing year, their memories fade a little more. The last veterans are leaving us, quietly, humbly, as if stepping off the final parade ground. And when the last witness is gone, it will be up to us to remember, to tell, to never forget. Because history only dies when stories stop being told. Across the world, museums and memorials try to keep their flame alive. The soft light on a soldier's name, the faint sound of a bugle at dusk, the silence of 2 minutes that speaks louder than any words. In those silences, we find them again. The boy who never saw home, the nurse who saved lives till her own gave out, the pilot who went down with his plane so others might live. They are all still here, in the courage of every rescuer, in the hope of every refugee, in the tears of every parent who prays their child returns home. The world that remembers them is a world still capable of compassion, and that, perhaps, is their greatest victory. As the final frame fades to black, a single message remains on screen. They fought for a world they would never see. Let us build the world they dreamed of. The music swells softly, not in triumph, but in gratitude. Because this story, their story, is not about war, but about what survives after it. Memory, courage, humanity. For every name we remember, there are hundreds more we will never know. For every medal polished with pride, there are thousands buried beneath the dust of time. The forgotten soldiers of World War II do not ask for tears or praise. They ask for only one thing: that we do not forget. Because forgetting is the second death, the one that erases what bravery once built. When the world trembled under fire, they stood firm. When hope seemed lost, they became the light. And now, it is our turn to carry that light forward, to build a world where their sacrifice was not in vain. Every generation inherits a choice: to repeat history's mistakes, or to honor its lessons. The soldiers of the past fought with guns. We fight with memory, compassion, and truth. They dreamed of peace. We must protect it, because peace is not the absence of war. It is the presence of understanding. Each time we choose dialogue over division, kindness over cruelty, unity over hate, we honor them. The forgotten soldiers belong not just to one country, but to all humanity, their blood mixed with the soil of every continent, reminding us that freedom was never a national victory, it was a human one. In the end, what they left behind was not ruins, but resilience. Not despair, but determination. And that spirit lives on in us. So when you see an old photograph in black and white, don't just look at the faces. Listen. The forgotten soldiers of World War II, men and women whose names history almost erased, now live again in memory, in gratitude, in peace. Their journey ended long ago, but their courage travels through time. Each generation that remembers becomes part of their unfinished story. The winds still whisper across empty battlefields. The oceans still guard the wrecks of lost ships. The mountains still echo with the distant sound of boots, marching toward an unknown fate. They are not gone. They are the heartbeat of every sunrise after a long night of darkness. They are the voice that says, stand firm in the face of fear. Choose peace, even when anger is easier. Protect what we died for. The credits begin to roll, but remembrance has no end. To those who fought and fell, to those who waited and wept, to those who were never named, we remember you. The narrator's voice softens, calm, distant, yet full of warmth. This film is for the nameless, the faceless, the brave, for the soldiers who never return, and for the families who never stopped waiting. The music swells, a gentle blend of violins and drums, like a heartbeat slowing down. It is for the hands that held rifles, for the eyes that saw too much, for the hearts that carried hope through hell. It is for every forgotten soul, whose silence built our tomorrow. The screen fades to images, black and white faces of soldiers, nurses, sailors, and civilians, smiling, laughing, marching, dreaming. A child salutes, a mother prays, a veteran closes his eyes beneath the flag. Then the words appear on screen, in memory of the millions who served, suffered, and sacrificed, so that the world could live free. The final voiceover begins slow, powerful, eternal. They were not heroes because they fought. They were heroes because they never gave up on humanity. The world has changed. The guns have fallen silent, the cities rebuilt, the skies are clear again. But somewhere in the quiet corners of our hearts, the echoes of their footsteps still remain. The forgotten soldiers of World War II. They left us more than history. They left us a mirror, a reflection of who we were, and who we must strive to become. They taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the strength to move forward despite it. They showed us that unity can rise from ashes, and that even in the darkest of nights, a single spark of hope can light the way. Today, their uniforms are gone, their weapons rusted, but their legacy breathes in every act of peace, in every voice that chooses truth. They remind us that humanity is not measured by power, but by compassion, that our greatest duty is not to win wars, but to prevent them. As generations pass, memory fades like old film, but remembrance is a choice. Every time we tell their stories, every time we honor their sacrifice, we keep their light alive. Because the greatest memorial is not made of stone, it is made of memory. It lives in classrooms, in stories whispered by elders, in children who look at those black and white photographs and ask, who were they? And the answer will always be, they were us. Ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Their courage is our inheritance, their peace is our responsibility, and their memory, that is our promise to the future. Someday, the last witness will be gone, but their spirit will remain. In every flag that rises with dignity, in every moment we choose dialogue over destruction, in every silent prayer for a better world, we owe them this much, to remember, not just how they died, but how they lived. They dreamed of a time when nations would be united not by fear, but by understanding. That dream is not finished. It continues with us. So let their light guide us forward. Let their memory teach us mercy. Let their story remind us that peace, real peace, begins in the human heart. Because though history may fade, their legacy never will. The forgotten soldiers are gone, but the light they left behind still shines. Yet somewhere in that peace, their presence lingers. The forgotten soldiers of World War II. Men and women who gave everything, not for conquest, but for the hope that humanity could be better. Their courage echoes in the quiet strength of a nurse, in the resilience of a rebuilt city, in every hand that reaches out to heal instead of harm. They were not just warriors, they were witnesses. Witnesses to the worst and best of mankind. They saw cities burn, and then saw them rise again. They saw hate destroy and hope rebuild. When they marched, they carried not only weapons, but the weight of every promise that life should go on. And when they fell, they left behind something greater than victory. They left behind proof that even in chaos, courage survives. History often forgets names, but courage leaves its own trail, in monuments, in songs, in silence. Some rest in foreign fields, their graves unmarked, but their spirit stands guard over every dawn that follows. Every sunrise is a salute, every free breath, a tribute. The forgotten soldiers remind us that heroism is not loud. It is steady. It is the quiet choice to stand when others fall. Their bravery was not in their weapons, but in their will, not in how they fought, but in why they fought. They fought for a world they might never see, and that is the purest form of sacrifice. Their courage still whispers through time. Do not forget what we learned. Do not lose what we won, and never let darkness return unchallenged. As we stand in the comfort they built, we must remember, peace is not a gift. It is a responsibility. The forgotten soldiers gave us the blueprint of humanity, written not in ink, but in blood, in faith, in hope. And as their voices fade into history, the echo of their courage remains, guiding us toward a world worthy of their sacrifice. Simple sentences, carrying entire worlds within them. Those letters never shouted like generals. They whispered of love, fear, and faith. Some reached home, carried across oceans and front lines. Others were lost buried in mud, burned in fire, or resting still, folded inside a soldier's jacket. The forgotten soldiers of World War II did not all die on the battlefield. Some died waiting for a letter that never came. Imagine a mother standing at her door, hands trembling as the postman walks away, a wife holding a sealed envelope, her tears staining the ink that reads, "My love, when the war ends, will begin again." But for them, the war never ended. Those words frozen in time became their last heartbeat. In museums today, behind glass and silence, those letters still breathe. Faded ink, broken grammar, but every word bleeds emotion. Tell my son I'm proud of him. Tell my father I'm sorry. Tell her I still dream of her smile. They never knew those letters would one day become history. They were not writing to the world. They were writing to life itself. Some wrote about sunsets they missed, others about the smell of rain back home. One young soldier ended his letter with, "If I don't return, tell the world I tried." That single line captures an entire generation. People who stood between darkness and dawn, not because they were fearless, but because they believed tomorrow was worth fighting for. The forgotten soldiers may not have returned, but their words did. They traveled through time, finding new readers, new tears, new hearts. When we read them today, it's as if they speak again. Through paper, through silence, through history, they remind us that war is not about numbers. It's about names, not about nations, but about people who loved, dreamed, and hoped. Those letters never came home, but they carried home within them. And as long as someone reads them, remembers them, or whispers their words aloud, they are never truly gone. The cities once turned to rubble rose again, not from power, but from memory. Children played in streets where tanks once rolled. Flags fluttered in the wind that once carried smoke. The forgotten soldiers of World War II did not just fight for victory, they built the foundation of peace we stand upon today. Every bridge rebuilt, every school reopened, every hand that chose to heal instead of harm, carried their spirit forward. They were gone, but their courage remained in the bricks and in the breath of every free person. Their legacy wasn't carved only in monuments, but in compassion, in the quiet decision of nations to unite, in the birth of the United Nations, in treaties, in dialogue, in the idea that no generation should endure what they endured. Out of destruction came duty, out of grief came gratitude. The war that ended their lives began a lesson for all humanity, that peace is fragile, and freedom must be guarded not with hate, but with humanity. A farmer plowing the same fields once scarred by bombs, a teacher reading history to a class filled with laughter, a doctor stitching wounds in a hospital built on former battlefields. These are their victories. These are their monuments. They did not live to see the world they dreamed of, but we live in it, a world born from their courage. And yet, the legacy they built is not complete. Every act of kindness continues their mission. Every stand against injustice honors their name. Every moment we choose peace over power. We keep their story alive. The Forgotten Soldiers are no longer just names on marble. They are every heartbeat that values freedom, every tear that mourns for peace. They taught us that rebuilding is not only about stone and steel, it's about forgiveness. That the true victory is not in conquering others, but in conquering hate. Today, as we walk freely beneath open skies, their invisible hands still guide us. They remind us that the price of peace was paid long ago, and that our duty is to protect it. Their legacy lives in every sunrise over a peaceful land, in every child who learns instead of fights, in every heart that dares to hope. The Forgotten Soldiers built more than a world. They built a promise that humanity, though broken, can rise again. The museum is silent. Dust floats in the golden light that filters through the old glass windows. A single chair creaks, and on it sits a man, frail but proud, his eyes carrying the weight of an entire century. He is one of the last, a soldier who once marched where the world burned. His hands tremble as he holds an old photograph. Black and white, edges frayed, faces fading. "They were my brothers," he whispers. "They were boys, just boys." Around him, children walk through the museum, their eyes wide with curiosity, unaware that the man before them once changed the world. He smiles softly. "We were afraid every day," he says, "but we kept walking, because someone had to." The Forgotten Soldiers of World War II. He remembers them all. The laughter before the storm, the silence after the gunfire, the faces that never came home. "You know," he says, his voice breaking, "we didn't fight for glory. We fought so you'd never have to." His medals shine dully under the light, not as trophies, but as echoes of lives that ended too soon. He takes a slow breath, as if breathing for those who can't anymore. "People ask me," he says, "was it worth it?" He looks at the children laughing near the exit, free, innocent, untouched by war, and smiles again. "Yes," he whispers, "it was worth everything." His eyes drift to the window, where sunlight spills like a gentle memory over the floor. "We were the fire," he says, "so that the world could become light." The room falls silent again. Only the ticking of a clock remains, steady, like a heartbeat of history refusing to stop. The old man stands slowly, straightens his back as if saluting invisible comrades, and places the photograph on the table. On it, young faces smile forever, frozen in a moment of courage, untouched by time. "Tell them," he says softly, "tell them we were here. Tell them what it cost." And as he walks away, his shadow stretches across the floor, merging with those of the men who never came home. Outside, the wind stirs the flags, whispering through the trees like distant voices. The last witness fades into the crowd, but his words remain, carried by memory, by gratitude, by the promise that no one who gave everything will ever be truly forgotten. But their story, the story of the Forgotten Soldiers, still breathes in the wind that moves across the old fields, in the rain that falls over the graves, in every heartbeat of the world they helped to rebuild. They are gone, yet their presence lingers everywhere, in the laughter of children who have never heard the sound of war, in the freedom of nations that once knew only fear, in the unity of strangers who now call each other brothers. The world they left behind was not perfect, but it was alive. Because of them, they turned chaos into courage, pain into purpose, and from the ashes, they built tomorrow. Their sacrifice became the soil in which peace could grow. When we walk through peaceful streets, when we hold hands without fear, when we dream freely, that is their victory. They didn't fight for power or pride. They fought so the world could learn compassion, so that one day, we would look back and say, never again. And though time moves forward, their legacy stands still, like the stars above a dark horizon, guiding us quietly through every storm. Each memorial, each photograph, each whispered name, is not just a reminder of death, but a celebration of life. For they showed us that even in the face of destruction, humanity can rise. The forgotten soldiers may never return, but their dreams walk beside us. Every school built, every song sung in peace, every sunrise unbroken by gunfire, is a chapter written in their honor. Their world became our inheritance, and what we do with it, that is our answer to their sacrifice. So when you see the old war films in black and white, remember, those were real people who felt, feared, and loved just like us. They were not fighting for history books. They were fighting for humanity, and though their names fade from stone, their light remains, eternal, broken, and alive in every act of peace. This is the world they left behind, and it is now our turn to guard it, to honor it, to keep it human. The forgotten soldiers of World War II may have left their bodies behind, but their spirits never stopped marching. In the stillness of dawn, in the gentle hum of the wind over the fields they once crossed, you can almost hear them, footsteps echoing faintly, not in war, but in remembrance. They walk beside us, not as ghosts, but as guardians of memory. When a nation chooses peace, they stand taller. When hatred rises, they whisper, "Remember us." And when the world grows cold with indifference, their unseen hands light candles in the hearts of the living. Because their story was never meant to end in silence, history calls them soldiers, but they were more than uniforms and ranks. They were dreamers, artists, sons, lovers, people who believed that someday the world would learn from their pain. The truth is, they never truly died. Every act of kindness, every bridge of understanding, every moment of forgiveness, that is where they live. The earth carries their essence, the sky their prayers, and when we look up, maybe those distant lights aren't just stars, but the souls of those who refuse to be forgotten. In every war memorial's quiet shadow, in every field where poppies bloom red against gray stones, there lies a sacred silence, not of death, but of gratitude. The forgotten soldiers are part of something eternal now, a rhythm that hums beneath time itself. They remind us that bravery was never about battle, but about belief. Belief that humanity could rise. Belief that peace could prevail. Belief that love, even in war, could still survive. And that belief, passed from generation to generation, is the pulse of the world they saved. So tonight, as the wind moves softly through the trees, listen closely. You'll hear them, a million silent voices, marching not to fight, but to remind. Remember us. Live kindly. Keep the light alive. Because as long as humanity remembers, their march will never end. The forgotten soldiers of World War II rest beneath the same sky they once fought under. Their graves scattered across continents are not forgotten grounds of dust and stone, but sacred testaments to humanity's greatest lesson, the lesson that freedom has a price, and memory is its keeper. Decades have passed, yet time itself seems to pause when their stories are spoken aloud. For history is not made by dates or generals, but by those who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. Their faces may be lost to fading photographs, their names blurred on crumbling marble, but their spirit endures in every heartbeat of peace. Every sunrise that breaks through the horizon, every child who laughs without fear, is a silent victory they still protect. We build cities now where battlefields once burned. We trade weapons for words, and silence for song. And in every note of that song, they live again. They remind us that courage isn't in the roar of guns, but in the quiet strength of mercy. That heroes are not those who seek glory, but those who carried hope through the darkness. And that remembrance is not mourning, it is gratitude. As the years drift like leaves across the river of time, one truth remains unbroken. They are not forgotten. They never will be. Time will remember them, in stories told by firelight, in classrooms filled with wonder, in the hearts of those who still believe that peace is worth fighting for. The war ended, but their legacy did not. Because every generation that chooses compassion over cruelty keeps their spirit alive. Every act of kindness is another soldier remembered. Every moment of silence is a battlefield at rest. And every tear that falls for the forgotten becomes a prayer for the living. So let history record the victories, but let humanity remember the souls. They were never truly lost. They became part of time itself. And as long as there is breath in the world, their march continues, in memory, in peace, in us. Yet, if you listen closely, beneath the hum of cities, beyond the rhythm of modern life, you can still hear them, the echoes, the whispers of men and women who once stood on the edge of humanity and refused to let it fall. They are not ghosts. They are the quiet guardians of time, the forgotten soldiers of World War II, who never asked for glory, only remembrance. Their footsteps still live in the soil of Europe, their dreams buried with the ruins they rebuilt. They were the generation that saw the end of the world, and still chose to love again. They returned home to shattered towns, to families who could barely recognize them, to nations that mourned more than they celebrated. And yet, they built again, brick by brick, life by life. The same hands that once held rifles, now held newborns. The same hearts that survived the darkness, now dared to hope for light. That is their true victory, not in the battles they fought, but in the humanity they rebuilt. The war may have ended, but their courage became eternal, because every generation since then has lived in the peace they carved out with their blood. Their stories live on in museums, in faded letters, in the eyes of old veterans who still salute the flag, not for power, but for those who never came home. And though time may blur their names, their sacrifice remains carved into the soul of the world. For history forgets faces, but it never forgets love. So when the rain falls softly on silent memorials, or when a child places flowers on a grave, they'll never understand. Know that the world is remembering the soldiers who gave their tomorrows, so that we could have today. And that is what makes them eternal, because eternity isn't measured in years. It's measured in hearts that still care, in generations that still whisper their stories, in voices that still say, never again. The forgotten soldiers are not forgotten anymore. They live in the silence between wars, in the peace that follows chaos, in the hearts that dare to hope. Their echoes will never fade. They are the music of eternity. For as long as the world remembers, they will live on. Humanity has walked through fire, but it has learned somehow to rise again. The forgotten soldiers of World War II are gone from sight, yet their presence still breathes in every free horizon. Every time a flag waves without fear, every time a mother holds her child in safety, every time two nations choose dialogue over destruction, their legacy glows a little brighter. They were the bridge between darkness and light. They carried the world through its longest night so that we could awaken to dawn. Their names may have faded, but their message still burns. War is not courage, peace is. Around the world, museums tell their stories, memorials guard their memories, and quiet hearts keep their faith alive. In Japan, the ruins of Hiroshima whisper of peace. In France, the beaches of Normandy sing of sacrifice. In Poland, the silence of Auschwitz pleads for compassion. These are not places of death. They are sanctuaries of remembrance. Because peace was born there, in the ashes of what we lost. The light beyond war is not blinding or loud. It is gentle, the laughter of a child, the kindness of strangers, the simple act of forgiveness. It is the understanding that humanity's greatest weapon is empathy. The soldiers who once fought now rest in eternity, their spirits carried by time itself, but their dream of a world united in peace still calls to us. And now, it is our turn to remember not just what they died for, but what they lived for, to protect what they built, to heal what they left behind. Because every generation that forgets the pain of war risks repeating it, and every generation that remembers becomes the light they once fought to see. The story of World War II was written in blood, but its message is written in love. The Forgotten Soldiers gave the world one final gift, the chance to choose peace. And as long as we keep choosing it, they will never be forgotten. Look toward the sky, see how it glows, not with fire, but with promise. That is the light beyond war, the light they carried, the light we must keep alive, for the world they dreamed of is the world we now hold. Decades have passed since the last shots of World War II were fired, yet the echo of that war still hums beneath the silence of peace. The Forgotten Soldiers are no longer names carved in stone. They are the foundation upon which our freedom stands. Every generation that walks this earth owes something to them. Even if it doesn't know their faces, they left behind no monuments of gold, no crowns or empires, only lessons. Lessons written in courage, in pain, and in the quiet endurance of hope. The world they left behind was shattered, but from its ruins grew something stronger, a belief that humanity could rise again. Across nations, once divided by hatred, alliances were born, enemies became partners, and where tanks once rolled, trade and friendship now flow. The soldiers who fell never saw this future, yet it exists because of them. Their legacy isn't just history, it's a living force that shapes the conscience of the world. In classrooms, teachers speak their stories. In art, their pain becomes poetry. In peace treaties, their sacrifice becomes law. And though many of their graves lie unmarked, their memory lives in the kindness we choose each day. Because peace is not something that happens once, it must be kept alive, protected, renewed with every generation. The Forgotten Soldiers did not fight for conquest. They fought so that one day, the world could learn to cherish what war destroys. That is their legacy, not victory, but wisdom. A wisdom that whispers, never again. Never again should the world allow hate to grow unchecked. Never again should power drown out compassion. Never again should humanity forget its own heart. The peace we live in today is fragile, but it is also sacred. It carries the weight of every soldier who dreamed of tomorrow. And so, as time moves on, we must be its guardians, to live gently, to forgive freely, to speak truth, even when it trembles. These are the new acts of courage. The battlefield has changed, but the fight for humanity remains. The Forgotten Soldiers of World War II may rest, but their dream still marches on, in the hearts of those who refuse to let history repeat itself. Their war ended in 1945. The world rebuilt itself after the Second World War, but in the quiet corners of history, the echoes still wait. Because history never dies, it sleeps, and when humanity forgets, it wakes. The Forgotten Soldiers gave their lives believing that the world would remember. But memory is fragile. It fades beneath comfort, beneath distraction, beneath the illusion that peace is permanent. Every generation must decide, will we honor their pain, or will we repeat it? History has a voice. It whispers through the ruins of Berlin, through the ashes of Hiroshima, through the silence of Auschwitz. Remember us, it says. Do not make us speak again, for when history speaks, it speaks in fire and famine, in broken homes and broken hearts. It speaks in the language of loss. The 20th century taught humanity everything it needed to know about destruction. Yet the 21st still flirts with the same shadows. Division, greed, fear, the same seeds that once grew into war, still linger in the soil of the human heart. And so, the question remains, have we truly learned? The soldiers who once stood beneath rain and rubble believed their suffering would forge a better world. They dreamed of peace, not as an idea, but as a promise. That promise belongs to us now. We are the keepers of their dream. We are the guardians of their silence. Because when hatred returns, when truth bends beneath power, when humanity forgets its own reflection, history begins to stir. And if it speaks again, its voice will not be gentle. But there is hope. There has always been hope. For every generation has the chance to listen, before history needs to shout, to remember that the greatest monument to the fallen is not stone or marble, it is the act of peace itself. The Forgotten Soldiers did not die for war stories. They died for the silence that follows, the silence of peace. And if we honor that silence, if we learn to listen, maybe history will rest. Maybe it will no longer need to speak in sorrow. Until then, the past stands, watch, patient, eternal, waiting for us to choose wisely. Because when history speaks again, the world will listen, but it may be too late to answer. Entire cities had vanished into dust. Millions were gone, leaving behind empty chairs, folded letters, and memories carved into stone. Yet, somehow life returned. Out of the ashes came laughter again. Hesitant, fragile, but real. The air no longer smelled of gunpowder, but of rain, earth, and spring. The forgotten soldiers never saw this new world, but every heartbeat of peace belongs to them. Their sacrifice became the seed of rebirth. Across continents, nations rebuilt from ruins. The same lands that once burned with hate now bloomed with hope. Where tanks once rolled, children now played. Where soldiers once fell, flowers grew. And where despair once reigned, people began to dream again. The world they left behind was fragile, scarred, humble, but wiser. It learned that peace was not something won once, but something earned every day. It learned that hatred divides faster than bullets, and that forgiveness heals deeper than victory ever could. In every generation that followed, echoes of their courage lived on. In the doctors who healed, in the teachers who taught, in the dreamers who built bridges instead of walls. They taught us that strength is not in domination, but in compassion. And even as decades passed, their shadows stretched into our time. Each memorial, each poppy laid in silence, each whispered story between father and son, keeps them alive. The world they left behind is the world we live in now. A world shaped by their suffering, yet blessed by their hope. We owe them not just remembrance, but responsibility. Responsibility to protect the peace they died for. Responsibility to speak when injustice rises. Responsibility to ensure their story never becomes just another chapter in a forgotten book. For as long as humanity remembers them, their world will remain bright. The world they left behind isn't perfect, but it is alive. It breathes with gratitude, with lessons learned through tears and time. And every time the wind moves through the fields where they once stood, it carries their promise forward. Never again, never forget. Always remember why peace matters. Because this world, our world, is the light born from their darkness. And in every sunrise, every song of freedom, every moment of love, they still live.